going to continue talking about the Ramayana. A few words about the international influence of the Ramayana. People of Myanmar. That used to be Burma, didn't it? People of Myanmar and the royal courts and people of Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia recite and enact the stories from the two epics, that means the Mahabharata and Ramayana, in plays and dance. Indonesia, though predominantly Muslim, boasts of having the best Ramayana ballet in the world. So the Ramayana really all over Asia. It's had a lot of influence. Here's another interesting fact. Thai kings of Thailand, beginning with Rama I in 1782 to the present king Ram IX, took the title of Rama. So in Thailand, the kings are called Ramas. That's their title because of the influence of the story. Ram was known for his valor, moral integrity, and justice. Another historian says there are innumerable versions of the text, told and retold in different regions. And one scholar says that above all, it is a tale about Dharma. So before we go into the story again, and we'll finish it up today, I want to talk about this concept of Dharma because this notion of Dharma is really at the center of Hindu culture. And it's really hard to understand Hindu culture at all, or for that matter, the religions of India without understanding Dharma. You may remember that in Buddhism, it's the path is the Dharma. The whole point is Dharma. That's the path. So, what is Dharma? We'll talk about that for a minute, then get back to the matinee. Get back to the story of the Ramayana. The Sanskrit word Dharma comes from a root DH and a vowel R, which sort of pronounced tree or something, or tur, or something like that. Anyway, which means to sustain. If we look at older Sanskrit literature, the word Dharma meant an essential characteristic. For example, water. The essential characteristic of water is, let's say that it's, among them, it's liquid or it's transparent. So transparency and liquidity would be considered the dharma of water. Or a typical poetic phrase that's used to say that someone died. The poets will say that the dharma of time overcame the person. Because time, the nature of time is that it basically destroys everything. Everything is, right? Everything is destroyed in time. Our bodies will die in time. And so to say that, so they use this phrase, the kala dharma, the dharma of time, which is that everything comes to an end. So dharma, the word dharma was used in this way because it means an essential characteristic. In other words, if something's not liquid and it's not transparent, it's not water. So to say that dharma is the essential characteristic of something means without that it's not the real thing. So that if you have something that's not transparent, it's not pure water, because dharma. So it's dharma which sustains, which holds the identity of a thing. Now, the word dharma also, of course, came to be used as the essential characteristic of a particular social position. For example, here's an example. A common word in Sanskrit, compound word is Raja Dharma, the duty of kings, or the Dharma of kings. Or another phrase you'll find is Stri Dharma, which is the duties of women. Or, you remember the social system we talked about, the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, in other words, the teachers and priests, the nobles and warriors, the traders, and merchants and farmers, and the workers. They each have their Dharma. They each have their Dharma, and they're sustained. So, if a king does not perform Raja Dharma, he's not a real king. So it is his Dharma which sustains his position as a king. And so the word has been translated as law, or justice, or duty. It's also the force, as in Star Wars. George Lucas actually studied these things. The idea being that there's a typical phrase you'll find in Sanskrit literature, such as Mahabharata or the Ramayana, that when Dharma is protected, it protects. And when Dharma is injured, it injures. So Dharma is this cosmic force that reciprocates with you. If you protect it, it protects you. You injure it, it will injure you. And of course, you get the opposite term, adharma, which means that's sort of like the dark side of the force. So, in a conservative social situation where you have people on top, the Brahmins, who are attached to their position and want to keep the status quo the way it is, they emphasize very strongly dharma. Everyone should do their dharma. And you get this idea, which you also had in Europe. Now, it's very popular in the West to look down on the hereditary caste system of India. However, Europe, up until the Industrial Revolution, up until very recently, Europe, for a very long time, had a hereditary caste system. Nowadays, we talk about upper class, middle class, and lower class. That's a very modern way of talking. Upper class in this country has absolutely no cultural requirement. It just means you have a lot of money. So if someone has a lot of money, there's no cultural requirement. It doesn't matter how you speak. It doesn't matter what you know or don't know. It doesn't matter how you behave, as long as you're, basically within the law. It just means you have a lot of money. Lower class just means you don't have money. Totally irregardless of anything else about you. So the idea of dividing people, classifying people by how much money they have is a relatively modern thing. It's a new thing. If you look at European history, for example, we have in Sanskrit these varnas, these social divisions. Like I just said, Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudras. Europe, before the industrial and capitalist revolutions, they didn't speak that way in Europe. The people were upper class, middle class, and lower class. They talked about estates. And so the first estate was a clergy. The first estate was a clergy. In other words, the Brahmins. Same system as India. The first estate was a clergy. The second estate was the nobility, the Kshatriyas. The third estate, they mixed the business and labor, management and labor, was the Vaishyas, the mercantile or farmers, and the workers. That was the third estate. And it was a hereditary system. So that even if let's say a priest didn't have a lot of money, the priest was still at a certain social level because of the culture of that person or because of the social responsibility and so on. And you see this tension. You can actually, if you read European novels and other literature, you can see very clearly what happened with the Industrial Revolution, the creation of new wealth, a new social order. You see it, for example, in Russian novels in the mid-19th century. I mean, you see it everywhere. Turgenev and Dickens and, everywhere, where this new money is taking over. And so you get impoverished nobles. They have all the social status, but they have no money. And so gradually the new money is buying their titles and everything. So there's this new order. And then it's all about capital. It's like more capital, higher class. Less capital, lower class. So anyway, this system in India, based on Dharma, there was a similar situation. If you look at feudal law in Europe, if you look at the pre-industrial social order, the estate system, it was very similar to India. So Europe did have a very definite hereditary caste system. The only difference between India and Europe is that Europe had an industrial revolution sooner and modernized sooner. Now in India that they have their own modernization, of course, the caste system is also becoming weakened because of urbanization, industrialization. Anyway, Dharma. Now, there's also the spiritual idea that, a few things. There are scriptures called Dharma Shastras. Wrong side of the chalk, right? Dharma Shastras, which are scriptures or rule books for Dharma, which mostly talk about these different castes and so on. And there's something called Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan means eternal. So Sanatan Dharma means that just as if you're a king, you have to do your Dharma to be a real king. Or if you want to be a respectable lady, there's the Dharma for respectable women, or for merchants, or for Brahmins, for everyone. So in the same way, the soul has its own Dharma, because the soul has its own characteristics, the eternal soul, and that's called Sanatan Dharma. In fact, in India, Hindus often would refer to themselves, still do, as people who follow Sanatan Dharma, what they feel to be these eternal laws of nature. I want to compare this to one more thing, and then we'll get on to the Ramayana, and that is this idea of Dharma, the force of Dharma. I talked about that earlier, I think, but I think it's comparable to the we talked about earlier, the logos. If you look at Greco-Roman civilization, the logos, which is the idea that in the mind of God there is a divine pattern, there are laws, there are patterns, there is a logic in the mind of God, and that logic, that reason is expressed in the creation of this universe. So that same logos, that same logic, that same reason is embedded in the universe, and we as part of the creation, as human beings especially, we have within our own minds that same logos so that we can recognize the reason, the logic of the creation, and in so doing connect ourselves to the mind of God. And that was very much the idea back in classical civilization at a certain point. And as I mentioned, a gentleman in West Turkey, not named John, who wrote the book of John, the last of the four Gospels, was trying to appeal to the intelligentsia, the educated people of classical civilization who had this idea, and therefore he said that in the beginning was the logos, translated the word, in the beginning was the word, and this logos became flesh. So he was promoting the idea that since you all accept the logos, Jesus is actually the incarnation. That logos, that divine principle, divine logic, divine reason, has actually come to the world incarnated in the form of Jesus. Interestingly, I think without forcing a comparison, Rama, or Lord Ram for Hindus, is very much the embodiment of Dharma. He very much is the embodiment of Dharma. It's just that same argument is given in the book of John. And in the beginning was a logos, and the logos incarnated. So Ram is seen as the perfect son, as a perfect husband in some ways, as a perfect ruler, someone who takes care of the people, loves the people, is willing to sacrifice anything for the good of the people, and so on. So that's how Ram is perceived. That's the power he has within Indian culture. And in fact within Asian culture, whether we're talking about Thailand, where they name the kings Rama, or basically throughout East and Southeast Asia, you find this influence. So that's Ram, who incarnates or who embodies Dharma, virtue. Another translation for Dharma would be virtue. The idea being that if you follow the law is made in such a way, duties are divinely created in such a way so that you follow them, you will be virtuous, you will be good. And in that virtuous position, you can actually understand higher truth. So any questions on these points about Dharma and so on? Yes?
Could you just define Sanatan Dharma one more time?
Sanatan.
Yeah.
Sure. At no extra cost to you. Sanatan means eternal. And so the idea is just as a real king has essential characteristics or duties, which are Raja Dharma, or a real Brahmin, or a real, there are duties for husbands, wives, children, so on. So the pure soul, the eternal soul, free of any bodily covering, has its own characteristic. And so that nature of the pure soul is its Sanatana Dharma. And so in a sense, the whole system of Dharma is leading to the eternal Dharma. And as long as we're in this world, we have bodies, this or that gender, whatever our position is, then we follow the worldly dharmas that correspond to our bodily situation. But the idea is it's all leading to an understanding of our eternal Dharma as eternal souls. Yes?
I mean, if Lord Rama is considered the embodiment of Dharma, how can we understand that he sent Sita back to the forest after she proved her purity through the fire, and even the fire god said so? And knowing that he had two brothers that were perfectly capable of ruling the kingdom, why didn't he go to the forest with her to prove her purity?
Very good. That's a trailer for the end of the story. So we'll have to tell the whole story so you understand what that's about. Yes. Maybe that was a divine sign. I should get back to the story. Yes?
Isn't Krishna interpreted the same way as Ram, though? As a restorer of Dharma?
Yeah, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that in one of the most famous verses of Hinduism, that whenever Dharma declines, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, where Krishna says that whenever dharma is declining and abhyutanam adharmasya and adharma is ascendant, Krishna says, then I come myself. I come myself to this world as the avatar to restore dharma, dharma sangstapanarthaya, to restore dharma. So yeah, that is one of the key statements of the Gita, which Krishna explains why he's come to this world. So, without anything else on that, we'll get back to the story where we leave off. Cliffhanger. So, Rama, you may remember his stepmother Kaikeyi was sort of poisoned by her toxic maidservant. And then Kaikeyi cashed in her 2 boons, first of which is that her son, not Ram, against all the law, against Dharma actually, against Dharma, the firstborn son would not become the king, rather her son would become king. And with her second boon, Ram would be banished to the forest for 14 years. The forest is called Dandakaranya, which literally means the punishing forest. The punishing forest. It wasn't merely a forest, it was kind of a bad forest. So, kind of, being stuck in the Everglades or something. Anyway, so Ram goes to the forest, and he has the power. He could just usurp, he could just take the throne anyway. He was the most powerful, but he was committed, he was dedicated to follow his father's word. And so therefore, this is an example where Ram is glorified as the ideal son, that he was willing to give up everything in order to honor his father's word. And so he went to the forest, and then of course, Lakshman, who's very attached to Ram, one of his brothers, insists on going with him, and Sita, as I mentioned. Sita absolutely, she's furious at the idea that she won't go with him. And, she just says, I'm going. So they all go to the forest, and they have different adventures there, and there are different dangers. Now, the demon Ravana, who I mentioned before, who has the boon that he's invulnerable against gods, spirits, or all kinds of powerful beings, doesn't bother to even get a boon to protect himself against humans. He thinks human beings are puny and insignificant. And so therefore, when the gods pray to God, capital G, for the Lord to come down and save them from Ravana, in order to respect Brahma, because Brahma is the creator, and he sometimes sort of doesn't exercise discrimination. It's like, okay, you get a boon, what do you want? And so Brahma is sort of non-political and sort of gives people what they want. So in order to sort of respect Brahma, to keep that boon intact, and yet it's almost like if let's say you're the owner of a company, and one of your employees made an offer to some customer, like, okay, I'll sell you this for $10, and it's supposed to be $1,000, but that's an authorized employee, and they signed a contract. You have to honor it because you're the owner. And so the question is, how do you honor the contract and still avoid a big loss? So because Brahma is considered to be a servant of God, capital G, because ultimately there is a very powerful monotheism within Hinduism. It's not simply polytheistic. So from the point of view of Vishnu or God, how do you honor the promise made by Brahma, who after all is working for Vishnu, working for God, and at the same time save the universe? And so therefore Rama said that Vishnu or God came as a human being, because as a human being he could kill Ravana. Ravana had no protection against humans. So anyway, Ravana, who lives in Sri Lanka, and there's some debate whether that's a Sri Lanka of today, but it's an island just south of India. So Ravana hears about Sita through various means. We won't have to go into all the details. He hears about Sita, and Ravana is a very lusty guy. He sort of collects women. He's very powerful, and he's very lusty, and so he wants Sita. The fact that she's married, no problem. Like I heard once a friend of mine one time went down to Rio de Janeiro, and he said that in Rio, I personally spent a lot of time in Brazil, it's kind of like this very open society, and so they have a saying there where, like if a woman says to a guy that's trying to attract her that I'm already married, and the guy says, that's no problem, I'm not the jealous type. Anyway, Sita was very beautiful. Sita was, the most beautiful lady in the world. And so Ravana has this plan to kidnap her. There's a whole story of how Ravana kidnapped her. They were out in the forest, and somehow, through all these tricks, he lured Ram away and Lakshman, and then he came in the disguise of a Brahmin sage. And Sita, whose culture it was to serve the sages in the forest, she served the so-called sage, and then kidnapped her and flew off in airplanes. So you have these ancient literatures, they talk a lot about airplanes. And as far as what was really going on in ancient culture, and was there really? There's actually a scientific theory, scientific only because it's within that community, that the dinosaurs might have come from other planets or something, isn't it? What is that theory? Yeah, in fact, that guy Dawkins, who wrote the famous atheist at Oxford, he wrote a book saying, it might have come from other planets or something. So anyway, so airplane. So Ravana flies back to his kingdom. Ram comes back, finds his wife has been stolen, and it's very powerful. There's one powerful scene where he's lamenting. He's crying out so loudly. It's that the whole universe is reverberating with this cry because he's lost Sita. And did any of you see the last episode of Star Wars with those little munchkin monkey type people? Yeah. I think George Lucas also got that from the Ramayana. Because when Ram, he finds out that Sita somehow has been taken by Ravana, so he heads south in India, and he finds these very intelligent monkeys who speak and so on. And one of them is extremely famous, actually one of the most beloved figures in Hinduism, Hanuman. And I personally seen many temples to Ram and Sita and Hanuman. Hanuman was a member of this community who became the greatest devotee of Ram. Basically, they go down, so with the help of these monkeys, borrowed by George Lucas, with the help of these monkeys, they go down to the southern tip of India, and in a very famous incident, they have to get across the ocean to bring the armies across to save Sita. So Rama has his followers throw these giant boulders into the ocean, and Ram makes the boulders float on the water. And there are many songs about this, the Setu Bandha, building the bridge. In Sanskrit, you bind a bridge. But so they bound a bridge. They built a bridge over to Sri Lanka. The armies came over. There was a great battle, which would definitely be a summer blockbuster if they made a good movie of it. So there was this, fantastic battle with all kinds of higher order weapons and so on. And finally, Ram kills Ravana and takes Sita. There are certain famous stories involving Hanuman, which everyone loves in India. And that is, for example, at one point, I think it was Lakshman was wounded, and so he desperately needed some, naturopathic medicine, some herbs. And the herbs that Lakshman needed could only be found in certain mountains, so Hanuman had to jump back to the mainland, and he couldn't figure out which herb it was, so he just brought the whole mountain. And so you'll see many, it's very common Hindu art. You'll see posters everywhere of Hanuman carrying the mountain. There's another famous scene where Hanuman's love for Ram was one time doubted or challenged. And so there's a scene, anyway, very popular among Hindus, where he tore his chest open and showed in his heart, Sita and Ram were there in his heart. Isn't it? That's another popular poster, popular art of Hanuman. Yes?
In the book it says both Ram and Lakshman.
Yeah, probably, yeah, both of them. Now, another thing to understand, this, from the point of view of the tradition, this would be called Leela. Or pastime. In other words, Ram as the Lord and Lakshman as another avatar. It's not they can actually be wounded, but the idea is, imagine parents playing with a little child. Or sometimes they'll wrestle, or the parent, the mother, father will sort of fall on the ground, the child will climb on the parent, and they play like this. So the idea is that the Lord, in order to engage the devotees and bring out their emotions, plays in this way. And so, on the one hand, it's this great adventure and battle and all that. On the other hand, it's just the Lord playing, Leela. It's just playing with the devotees in different ways. So that's how it's seen within the tradition. So then, so Ravana is killed, and then Sita is brought back on a Pushpa Viman, another famous scene, on a flower airplane. They sort of fly back to Ayodhya. And they live there. Then the scene which you mentioned earlier, that, first of all, there's some doubt, because this is an extremely conservative society, where if a woman stays in the home of another man, an unknown man, then she kind of is like booted out of the community. And so the fact, even though Sita was kidnapped, the fact that, and this gets into a very controversial part of the story, the fact that Sita was kidnapped and spent so much time in the kingdom of Ravana, there was some doubt about her purity. Like, did she really maintain herself pure, or did she succumb to the pressure and the threats or the temptations? And so there's one scene where Sita enters a fire, actually, ordeal by fire. She actually enters a fire and comes out unharmed to prove that she was chaste. And then after some time, some people in the city of Ayodhya begin to grumble, like, I don't know if Ram should have accepted Sita back after she was gone for so long and so on. And then Ram abandoned, he renounces his wife, and she goes to the forest. And so this is a part of the story that is not the most popular part of the story, and some people have a lot of trouble with this. And yet at the same time, from within the tradition, at least as the story has come down to us, it's seen that given a choice between one's own personal happiness or the happiness of one's own family, if you are a public leader, you have to choose the happiness of the people. You cannot choose your own happiness or the happiness of your family over the good of the people. To be a public leader means you always put the people first. And that's how it, yes?
But, like she pointed out, why didn't you just have someone else make it?
Right. That's right, she did point that out.
And furthermore, I think that
That would have been more romantic, isn't it?
it makes the whole story a dharmic, because if this tree dharma is to be chaste, and she was absolutely chaste, and she was rejected, what's the use? What's the power of dharma?
What's the power of dharma? Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? Yes.
I just heard that she was not Sita. Actually, some devotee was cursed by someone, and she came in the form of Sita. And that was play, everything was arranged by.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there are other Puranas. There's a genre of literature called the Puranas. We'll talk about those more later. It's one of the most important kinds of literature in Hinduism. And I think it's a Kurma Purana, I forget which one, but there's a story that actually the real Sita was not sent away. It was sort of like a fictitious Sita, which shows that even in ancient times, people were looking for other explanations. And then, I mean, that scene, does that occur in the last book of the Ramayana? Because there's even some doubt about the authenticity of the last book of the Ramayana. But,
With Love Kush? The book with Love Kush?
yeah. So, another way the tradition would look at it is this, that ultimately, the purpose of the entire Vedic civilization is to get people out of this world and back to the spiritual world. That's the ultimate purpose. And therefore, Sita and Ram, who are seen as an eternal couple, and their time on the earth is a relatively infinitesimal time, they're actually an eternal couple, that they are teaching together that even following Dharma, ultimately, one has to renounce the world. One ultimately, and now think of the Shramana movements. And if you actually did the readings in the book, I mean, some of you must have actually done the readings. Did anyone do the readings? So, in the book, it was mentioned that you had this tension between the Shramana traditions that want to renounce the world and the householder traditions that want to do sacrifices and enjoy the world. And there was a compromise. They saw that at different stages of life, let's say in the householder stage, you do the karma kanda, you do the sacrifices, rituals, you enjoy the world, and at a later stage of life you renounce. So, if you look at Rama, the fact that he went to the forest, the fact that Rama never hesitated to give up his own enjoyment of the world, he had no attachment to enjoyment of the world, he was perfectly happy to give up all the opulences of a flourishing kingdom and go off into the wilderness. He was actually perfectly happy to do that. And in the Bhagavad Purana, which is probably the most important Purana, it said that when Sita left, Ram himself, of course the question I haven't answered yet, I may have to just answer that right away. You know, after watching that one long political campaign, I learned how not to answer questions. So I suppose the idea would be that the people really wanted Ram. The people really wanted Ram. They really loved him, and it's said over and over and over again that a king must be like a father to all the people, so that from the point of view of this culture, everyone in the kingdom was the family of Ram. And so therefore he had to act for the good of his family, which was the citizens. And they loved him and wanted him there. In the Bhagavad Purana it said that when Sita left, Ram himself gave up the world. I mean, he was nominally the king, but he dedicated himself simply to continuous sacrifices and actually gave up all worldly enjoyment. So it's not that without Sita he just kind of, occasionally dated or lived in the palace. He gave up all his personal enjoyment. And I think there's another thing going on here in terms of the avatar, Ram as an avatar. And that is because you have this very romantic story of Ram and Sita going to the forest together, Sita being kidnapped, Ram literally moving heaven and earth to get her back and so on. And so after all that, then the point is demonstrated that actually Sita and Ram both have no material attachment. They're not ordinary human beings and they have no material attachment, and they can let go of this knowing that they're actually an eternal couple. And so it's sort of demonstrating the principle of the highest material happiness with the perfect romantic love, and then demonstrating the other principle of complete renunciation, and actually demonstrating both of those principles, which are the two sides of the culture. Anyway, I didn't do it, so don't blame me. Yes?
Another explanation could be that these stories are not to be taken literally. Meaning, just take of Joseph Campbell's on and all that.
That's the easy way out, yeah.
I mean, why is that the easy way out? That's the hard way out. Because you have to really interpret the stories in a real symbolic sense.
I wouldn't say that's hard, because
I mean, taking things something literally...
No. I guess what I meant by saying it's the easy way out is that, first of all, Joseph Campbell, do you all know who Joseph Campbell is? He was very famous before your time. Actually, he was the guru of George Lucas. I mean, George Lucas studied with him mythology. He wrote all about mythology, and it's interesting because there was a time in Western academia when mythology was really looked down on. Everyone was sort of like into science. And then Joseph Campbell kind of made mythology respectable again. I mean, that's why nowadays in academics, mythology is not totally looked down on. And so in order to make it respectable again, he made a big compromise. And that is, he said that, yeah, mythology is not just primitive or useless. There's a lot of wisdom embedded in mythology. It's very important, even if it's not literally true. In other words, that's not really what happened. But when you look at the mythology of different peoples, what it's really telling you about is not an ancient sacred history. It's really telling you about the deep structures of the human psyche through its symbolic language and so on. The problem with this is that the people, let's say, who worship Ram, they would absolutely be offended by this idea. They're quite sure that there really was a person named Ram, and there really was a lady named Sita. And so if we say it's just symbolic, that's one way to go. But it's easy in the sense that it ignores, because once you get into symbolism, you can always come up with some clever thing. But to explain how can a divine being who is all-knowing and all-good, and whose purpose is actually to do its best for all people, why would such a divine being do this? And that's the question which, within the tradition, where people take Ram very seriously as a real person, that's the question that I think would concern people. And if you just reject the whole thing and say there never was a Ram, there never was a Sita, this is all false, it's all mythology, and then but what can we learn symbolically? What can we learn about human psychology? Then I think it may be challenging within the realm of the academic study of symbols. And it may be, interesting in terms of studying historical psychology, but in terms of the spiritual issues, the theological issues, those things are just simply banished. They're removed. Whereas those are the issues, the theological issues about the nature of God, are the issues that actually concern people within the tradition.
Well, maybe Joseph Campbell went too much in the other direction, as you said, to compromise in that state. Maybe somewhere in between, maybe things happen, but maybe not exactly as they have been given to us, because most of these things were carried down the tradition locally.
That's possible. That's possible that we have a text which has been altered.
And obviously, the stories about Jesus Christ, what is happening, a lot of stories are probably not exactly what happened at that time.
True, but we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, if you say that the story, the life of Jesus or the life of Ram, then of course, based on people's religious conviction, taking atheistic humanism as very much a religious conviction, based on where you are on the spectrum, then you may come to different conclusions about how much is mythology, how much is history. And so I'm simply saying I think it's easy just to assume that it's all false in the sense it didn't really happen. And just to assume that right off the bat, I think, is not really paying attention to the power of the tradition and sort of not really taking seriously what people within the tradition, including very, very bright people, what they say about it. Yes.
Also, there are many proofs of Ramayana being happened long back, like the bridge still, there are some...
The what is still
there are many proofs in Sri Lanka, actually, not in India though, but there are many proofs of the of Ravana's palace, and there are many proofs actually which people can actually see and which it links back long back to Ramayana.
Well, of course, if we talk about archaeological remains in Sri Lanka, we have to see how old they are, and they probably aren't that old. And they're certainly not anywhere near as old as because this story is supposed to take place in Treta Yuga, which is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years ago, if not millions of years ago. So we certainly don't have the remains of palaces that are that old in Sri Lanka. Yes?
I saw a satellite picture once of what was supposed to be the bridge to Lanka. It was only seen from satellite. It was pretty cool, but like you said, if it's too much.
Well, it's very interesting because, there is a geological theory that in the remote past, India was much larger. Isn't it? We have a geologist here. What do you know about that?
Well, sea levels were lower.
Yeah, sea levels were lower. The continent was much bigger. And so we don't even know if the Sri Lanka we have today is the Sri Lanka people are talking about. Because even geologically the world was different back then. So I'm not saying that you should automatically take it that it all happened exactly as it's stated in the Ramayana. But at the same token, we can't automatically reject it. Just, I think we have to actually think about it. Yes?
When you say much bigger, how much bigger do you mean?
Do you know the numbers?
Off the coast, let's say Florida, or South Carolina, or North Carolina, you can go out miles and miles from villages that are long credit over 10,000 years old. Sea level rise, it is, ice and saber-tooth tigers can go down to the town and do it particles. Other saber-tooth tigers and they're really plugged into the natural history and see these huge creatures and there were people that that's archaeology that used to live here. And the sea level was lower. And most of the civilization was along coastal places. Coast was like that. Sea level rose 10,000 years ago. A lot of what we know about past civilizations has disappeared. Because underwater archaeology is the most difficult. Archaeology is doing underwater area. How do you keep excavation open at 1,000 feet below sea level? Very famous in India, the work.
I mention a word about that. There's a very interesting statement in these ancient texts that, of course, Krishna lived in Dwarka, which is, do my little map of India again very quickly. Dwarka is sort of over here on the coast, and these ancient texts say that when Krishna left Dwarka, when Krishna left this world, the sea rose, and Dwarka was an island, the sea rose and buried Dwarka underwater. And they've discovered actually these underwater, these huge harbors, and about 4,000 years ago. In fact, the Indian gentleman who was the head of the Indian Archaeological Survey, I spoke to him about this. He was visiting in San Diego, and I had some conversations with him about this. So, yeah, I mean, another example which I gave earlier, an Indo-European thing, that the Rig Veda talks about a civilization on the Saraswati River. The only problem is there is no Saraswati River. And so people assumed this was mythology until they found the Saraswati River. And they found all kinds of civilization on it. So, but the river dried up and can only be identified by satellite photography. So the whole issue, to what extent, I mean, it's the exact same issue you find in the Bible, Old and New Testament. To what extent are we dealing with real history? To what extent is it mythology? What really happened? It's not always an easy question. In fact, it's usually not an easy question. Any other points about the Ramayana? The story of Ram?
What is the literal meaning of Ram?
Rama. The word Rama, it means a source of pleasure. Actually, the Sanskrit pastor is about to go over this case. There's a Sanskrit root, rum, not to be confused with the Caribbean beverage. That's pronounced like that. It's pronounced rum. And then if you make a long A, Rama, it means the source of pleasure. So again, Rama, this imagery, Rama, Ayodhya, Sita, they're almost like, Sita and Rama are almost like the mother and father of India. They're extremely important. And I mean, all over the country, Sita, Ram are, because it's a culture in general which reveres the parents and reveres the guru, reveres authority. So Sita, Ram really are like the parents of the civilization, in a sense. And people really have that feeling towards them. And so, for example, Gandhi. I don't know if any of you saw that old Gandhi movie with Ben Kingsley. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Anyway, in the movie, it begins, it's what's called bookends in Hollywood, where you start with something like Saving Private Ryan, where you start with a scene, and then it goes back into the story, and then at the end you come back to the same point again, so like frames the story. So the Gandhi story begins with his assassination. And as he's shot, he's lying there, he says, "Oh God." But actually, he said, "Hey Ram." Oh Ram. And so even Gandhi, at the end of his life, called out the name of Ram. So, Ayodhya, the idea of, and in fact, in Indian politics, in the last 20, 30 years or so, when there were these sort of movements against a type of almost like mean-spirited secularism, not merely secularism, but almost like an anti-religious secularism. And so there were cries that people wanted to return to Ram Raja. Raja means king, and Raja with a Y means kingdom. And so this image of Ram Raja, the kingdom of Ram, as the ideal political state, Ram as the ideal ruler, it's a very powerful central image in the, isn't it, in the Hindu mind. Extremely, it has very powerful hold on the Indian mind. The Hindu mind, the idea of Ram Raja, the kingdom of Ram. Ram is the ideal ruler. Ram is the example of what a son should be. Sita is the perfect woman. It's, it's so powerful that you can see that all this stuff about everything is empty, like Nagarjuna, like in the real world, like everything is empty or it's all one and so on. I mean, that was nice for the intellectuals, but on the ground, in the world, among people in general, these are the symbols, these are the ideas and the images that completely captured people. In fact, so much so that the Jains, for example, Jainism, they have their own Ram stories, and they have their own Mahabharata. Well, the other great epic is the Mahabharata. In some ways, even a, it's a larger, in some ways, even a more powerful epic. These are the two great stories. So the Jains and the Buddhists, they have their Ram stories. They have their Krishna stories, because it was just so pervasive that everyone in India had to have their version of it. So this devotion to Sita Ram, Hanuman as the ideal bhakta, the ideal devotee, that to be a loving servant of God is to be like Hanuman. I know myself, I've given innumerable lectures to Hindu audiences, hundreds and thousands of times, I think, in my life, and you can just refer to Hanuman, and everyone knows what you're talking about. Everyone knows you're talking about the ideal, the perfect ideal of selfless devotion to God. Hanuman, the servant of Ram. So this is a very important story, and we'll stop here then. See if I